My ex kicked me out of the house 24 hours after the divorce, and he thought he'd won. But I hid shrimp with caviar inside all the curtain rods, and the house turned into a reeking nightmare they couldn't get rid of for months. Need to tell this story because it's been 5 years, and I still can't believe I actually went through with it. People say revenge is a dish best served cold, but mine was served with shrimp and caviar, and it cost my ex-husband about $300,000. Let me start from the beginning. I met Richard when I was 28 and he was 32. I was working as a paralegal at a mid-sized law firm, and he was a financial consultant making good money. We met at a mutual friend's engagement party. He was charming, confident, well-dressed, knew all the right things to say. We dated for 2 years before he proposed, and I thought I'd found my person. The wedding was beautiful. His family paid for most of it, since they had money and my parents didn't. Looking back, I should have seen that as a warning sign. His mother made sure to remind me constantly that they'd spent $40,000 on our wedding, like I owed them something, like I should be grateful they'd allowed their son to marry beneath his station. The first few years were okay. Not great, but okay. Richard worked long hours and traveled frequently for work. I kept working at the law firm, climbing my way up to senior paralegal. We bought a house in the suburbs, a beautiful 4-bedroom colonial that Richard insisted we needed for when we had kids. Except we never had kids. I wanted them, was ready for them, but Richard always had an excuse. Not yet, we need to save more money, we need to get the house exactly right, we need to wait until his career is more stable. There was always something. After 5 years of marriage, I started noticing changes. Richard was on his phone constantly. He'd take calls in another room, he started going to the gym obsessively, buying new clothes, styling his hair differently, classic signs that I was too trusting to recognize at the time. I found out about the affair in the most cliché way possible. I came home early from work one day because I was feeling sick, walked into my own bedroom and found my husband in bed with a woman I'd never seen before. A younger woman, probably mid-20s, blonde, conventionally attractive in that generic Instagram influencer way. They both scrambled to cover themselves. Richard started making excuses immediately. It wasn't what it looked like, she was a client, and things just happened, it was a one-time mistake, he was so sorry. The woman just grabbed her clothes and ran out of the house half-dressed. I stood there in shock for what felt like hours, but was probably only a few minutes. Then I turned around, walked out of the house, drove to my sister's apartment, and stayed there for 3 days while I processed what had happened. When I finally went back home to talk to Richard, I expected him to be apologetic, to beg for forgiveness, to try to save our marriage. Instead, he was cold. He said he wanted a divorce. He said he'd been unhappy for years, and this affair had made him realize he couldn't stay in the marriage anymore. He said he was in love with the other woman, whose name was apparently Melissa. I was devastated, not just because of the infidelity, but because of how callously he was throwing away our entire relationship. 7 years together, 5 years of marriage, and he was discarding me like I was nothing. The divorce process. I hired a lawyer immediately, a good one, recommended by people at my firm. She was tough and smart and told me we'd fight for everything I deserved. The divorce was brutal. Richard tried to claim that since his income was higher, he should get the house. He tried to minimize my contributions to our marriage and our joint assets. His lawyer was aggressive and cruel, implying that I was a gold digger who'd trapped Richard into marriage. My lawyer fought back hard. We'd been married for 5 years in a state with equitable distribution laws. I was entitled to half of everything we'd accumulated during the marriage. The house, the savings, the retirement accounts, all of it. But Richard had advantages I didn't. His family had money and was funding his legal team. They could drag things out, file motion after motion, make the process as expensive and painful as possible for me. My savings were dwindling fast as legal bills piled up. After 8 months of fighting, my lawyer advised me to settle. We could keep fighting, but it would cost me everything I had, and I might not end up with much more than what was currently on the table. Richard was offering me $100,000, my car, and my personal belongings. He'd keep the house, most of the savings, and his retirement accounts. It wasn't fair, it wasn't equitable, but I was exhausted, emotionally drained, and almost broke. I took the settlement. The divorce was finalized on a Tuesday in November. I remember because it was cold and raining, and I felt like even the weather was reflecting my misery. The divorce decree gave me 30 days to move out of the house, 30 days to pack up 7 years of my life and find a new place to live. I thought that was harsh, but manageable. Richard had other ideas. 2 days after the divorce was finalized, he called me. He said he and Melissa were moving into the house that weekend, and I needed to be out by Friday. That gave me 3 days, 72 hours to pack up everything and leave. I told him the decree said 30 days. He said he didn't care what the decree said. This was his house now, and he wanted me out. If I wasn't gone by Friday, he'd have the locks changed and put my belongings on the lawn. My lawyer said he couldn't legally do that, but fighting it would require going back to court, filing motions, spending more money I didn't have. She advised me to just get out as quickly as possible. So I called my sister and some friends, rented a U-Haul, and spent 3 frantic days packing up my life. It was humiliating. Richard walked through the house during this time with Melissa, pointing out which furniture they were keeping and which pieces I could take. Mostly, I could take the stuff from the guest bedroom and my personal items. Everything else was staying. They were sickeningly affectionate with each other in front of me, touching, kissing, calling each other baby. Melissa even had the audacity to ask me if I could leave some of my kitchen gadgets because she liked them. I told her to go to hell. By Thursday evening, most of my stuff was packed. I'd found a small 1-bedroom apartment across town that I could afford with my salary. It wasn't much, but it was mine. I'd be moving in on Friday afternoon. That's when I decided I wasn't going to let Richard and Melissa have their perfect happy ending in my house without leaving my mark. On Thursday night, after everyone had left and I was alone in the house one last time, I decided to have a farewell dinner. My last meal in the home I thought would be mine forever. I went to the fancy grocery store and bought everything I'd been denying myself during the divorce to save money. Jumbo shrimp, expensive black caviar, a bottle of good champagne, fresh bread, fancy cheese. I spent about $200, which was completely irresponsible given my financial situation, but I didn't care. I wanted one nice moment in the midst of all this misery. I sat up at the kitchen table with nice dishes and cloth napkins. I opened the champagne and poured myself a glass. I ate slowly, savoring every bite, drinking in the silence and space of the house. It felt like a funeral for my old life, a wake for my marriage, a goodbye to the person I'd been. As I was eating the shrimp, an idea started forming in my mind. A terrible, petty, completely vindictive idea. The kind of idea that you're supposed to dismiss immediately because it's wrong and you're better than that. But I wasn't feeling better than that. I was feeling angry and hurt and vengeful. Richard had cheated on me, thrown me away like garbage, rushed me out of my own home, and was moving his mistress in before the divorce papers were even cold. He deserved some consequences. I looked at the shrimp tails on my plate, looked at the caviar, looked up at the custom curtain rods Richard's mother had insisted we installed throughout the house. Expensive, hollow brass rods that she'd special ordered from some boutique in Manhattan. And I made a decision that I'm still not sure I regret. I took several of the half-eaten shrimp tails and coated them thoroughly in caviar. The caviar would help them stick and would also rot, adding to the smell. Then I got a stepladder from the garage and went room by room, unscrewing the decorative finials from the ends of the curtain rods and stuffing the shrimp caviar combinations deep inside the hollow rods. I did the master bedroom, the guest bedrooms, the living room, the dining room. Everywhere there were curtain rods, I left my little gifts. I used about a dozen shrimp tails in total, distributing them throughout the house. Then I carefully screwed the finials back on, making sure everything looked exactly as it had before. The whole process took maybe 30 minutes. When I was done, I cleaned up all evidence of my dinner, washed the dishes, threw away the champagne bottle and shrimp shells in the outside garbage bin that would be collected the next morning. I made sure there was no trace of what I'd done. I spent that last night sleeping on an air mattress in the empty guest bedroom, feeling a mix of satisfaction and guilt about what I'd done. Part of me wanted to undo it, to confess, to be the bigger person. But the larger part of me, the part that was still raw and angry about everything Richard had put me through, felt like he deserved this. Friday morning, the movers came to take my furniture and boxes to my new apartment. Richard and Melissa showed up around noon to supervise and make sure I wasn't taking anything that wasn't mine. They walked through the house, checking rooms, making comments about how much better it would look once they redecorated with Melissa's taste. I watched them with a secret sense of satisfaction. In a few days, maybe a week, those shrimp are going to start decomposing. The smell would be subtle at first, then increasingly noticeable, then absolutely overwhelming, and they'd have no idea where it was coming from. As I was loading the last boxes into my car, Richard actually had the nerve to shake my hand and thank me for being reasonable about the move-out timeline. Melissa smiled at me, a smug, victorious smile that made my blood boil. She'd won my husband and my house, and she wanted me to know it. I smiled back and told them I hoped they'd be very happy here, that this house held a lot of memories for me, and I hoped they'd make beautiful memories of their own. I almost laughed saying it because I knew what kind of memories they were about to make. I drove away from that house for the last time feeling lighter than I had in months. I spent the first week in my new apartment unpacking and trying to adjust to my new reality. The apartment was small and old and nothing like the spacious house I'd grown accustomed to, but it was mine. No shared space with a cheating ex-husband, no memories of betrayal in every room, just a blank slate where I could start rebuilding my life. I heard nothing from Richard that first week, which was expected. We had no reason to communicate anymore. The divorce was final, the property was divided, we were done. I did feel guilty sometimes. What I'd done was petty and destructive. But then I'd remember how Richard had treated me, how quickly he'd replaced me, how little regard he'd had for my feelings, and the guilt would fade. 10 days after I moved out, my sister called me laughing. She'd run into one of Richard's neighbors at the grocery store, someone we'd both known from living in that neighborhood. The neighbor had mentioned that Richard's house had developed a terrible smell. They'd apparently called pest control thinking there was a dead animal in the walls. I acted surprised and concerned while internally celebrating. It was working. My petty revenge was unfolding exactly as I'd hoped. Over the next few days, I heard more through the grapevine. Richard and Melissa had the carpets professionally cleaned, had the ventilation system inspected, had exterminators come multiple times. The smell was getting worse instead of better. The neighbor said you could smell it from the street when the windows were open. I felt a little bad for the neighbors who had to deal with the smell secondhand, but not bad enough to confess. 3 weeks after I moved out, Richard called me. I was surprised to hear from him and almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of me. He sounded stressed and exhausted. He asked if I'd noticed any weird smells or pest problems when I was living in the house. I lied and said no, everything had been fine. He said they were having serious issues with an odor and had spent thousands of dollars trying to fix it, but nothing was working. I made sympathetic noises and suggested maybe it was a problem with the sewer line. He said they'd had that inspected too. Everything checked out. There was no logical explanation for this horrible smell permeating every room of the house. He asked if I'd be willing to come over and see if I noticed anything, since I'd lived there for years. I declined, saying it would be too painful to visit the house. He actually sounded disappointed. After we hung up, I felt a surge of satisfaction, mixed with disbelief that my plan had worked so well. By week 5, according to the neighborhood gossip network my sister had plugged me into, Richard and Melissa were desperate. The smell was so bad, they'd moved into a hotel. They'd had environmental specialists come out who found nothing. They'd had multiple contractors come, examine the house for mold, water damage, dead animals in the walls. Nothing. The smell was worse in the bedrooms and living areas, exactly where I'd planted most of my shrimp bombs. But no one thought to check inside the decorative curtain rods because why would they? Who would even think of that? Richard had apparently spent over $20,000 on inspections, cleanings, and remediation efforts. Nothing worked. The house was essentially uninhabitable. This was when I started feeling genuinely guilty. I'd wanted to inconvenience them and make them uncomfortable. I hadn't meant to drive them out of the house entirely or cost them that much money. Well, maybe I had, but seeing it actually happen made me feel like maybe I'd gone too far. But I didn't confess. I told myself that Richard had betrayed me first, that he'd treated me terribly, that he deserved some consequences for his actions. The guilt ate at me, but not enough to make me come clean. Around week 7, my sister heard through the neighborhood network that Richard and Melissa had decided to sell the house. They couldn't figure out what was wrong and couldn't keep paying for a mortgage, plus hotel costs, plus ongoing remediation efforts. They were going to cut their losses and move somewhere else. They listed the house at a fair market price, around $400,000. The house was beautiful from the outside and had been recently updated. It should have sold quickly. But the smell was impossible to hide during showings. Potential buyers would walk in, immediately notice the odor, and make excuses to leave within minutes. Richard's realtors started lighting candles and using air fresheners during showings, but that just created a weird combination of artificial floral scent mixed with rotting seafood. Week after week went by with no offers. Richard dropped the price once, then again. Still nothing. No one wanted to buy a beautiful house that smelled like something had died in every room. I watched this unfold from a distance with mixed feelings. On one hand, Richard was getting exactly what he deserved. On the other hand, I was causing this, and it was spiraling beyond what I'd intended. The shrimp had to be completely decomposed by now, but the smell had apparently permeated everything: the curtains, the carpet, the furniture. It would take more than just removing the source at this point. By month 3, Richard and Melissa were in serious financial trouble. They'd taken out a second mortgage on the house to pay for all the remediation work. They were still paying for a hotel. They couldn't sell the house. Richard's savings were depleted. His parents were helping financially, but were getting frustrated. According to my sister's sources, there were family arguments about whether Richard and Melissa should just walk away from the house and let it go into foreclosure. Richard looked terrible the one time I saw him from a distance at a coffee shop. He'd lost weight, had dark circles under his eyes, looked stressed and miserable. Melissa apparently wasn't handling the stress well either, and they were fighting constantly. Part of me felt vindicated. They'd started their relationship by destroying my marriage and hurting me terribly. Now their relationship was being tested by the consequences of that choice. There was a poetic justice to it. But part of me felt genuinely bad. I'd caused this. I'd turned their dream of living together in that beautiful house into a nightmare, and it had gone so far beyond what I'd initially intended. 4 months after I moved out, Richard called me again. This time he sounded defeated. He told me they'd been trying to sell the house for months with no success. They'd dropped the price to $300,000, then $250,000. Still nothing. No one wanted it. He was calling to ask if I knew anyone who might be interested in buying it. Maybe someone who worked in home renovation or house flipping who wouldn't be bothered by the smell issue since they'd be gutting the place anyway. I felt my heart start racing. This was it. This was my opportunity to recover everything I'd lost in the divorce, and more. But I had to play it cool. I acted hesitant and said I'd think about it. I let 2 weeks go by, during which the price dropped again to $200,000. Then I called Richard back. I told him I'd been thinking a lot about the house, that despite everything that had happened between us, I missed it. It had been my home for 5 years. I had good memories there, along with the bad. I'd been saving money and was in a position to maybe make an offer if he was willing to sell to me. Richard sounded simultaneously relieved and uncomfortable. He asked what he was thinking price-wise. I said I could offer $50,000 cash, take over the mortgage, and close quickly. The house had cost $400,000 when we bought it. Even with the smell issue, $50,000 was insulting. But Richard was desperate. He and Melissa had been living in a hotel for months. His savings were gone. His credit cards were maxed. His parents were pressuring him to resolve the situation. He had a second mortgage he couldn't afford. He needed out. He said he'd think about it and call me back. 2 days later, he called and accepted my offer. The closing happened fast. I worked with my lawyer to structure the deal, so I was paying $50,000 cash and assuming the existing mortgage, which had about $200,000 left on it. The second mortgage Richard had taken out was his problem to resolve. He had to pay it off before we could close. Richard's parents ended up giving him the money to pay off the second mortgage so the sale could go through. So in total, Richard walked away from a $400,000 house, having received $50,000 from me and having paid off a $70,000 second mortgage with his parents' money. He lost about $280,000 on the deal, not counting all the money he'd spent on inspections and cleanings and hotels. I, on the other hand, got the house I'd fought for during the divorce for a fraction of its value. Even with the mortgage, I was paying less than half of what it was worth. The day of closing, I signed all the papers with barely contained glee. Richard looked miserable and exhausted. Melissa wasn't even there. According to my lawyer, she and Richard had broken up 2 weeks earlier. The stress of the house situation had destroyed their relationship. So Richard had lost his wife, his girlfriend, most of his savings, and his house. And it was all because he'd given me 24 hours to move out and treated me like garbage during our divorce. The week after closing, I moved back into the house, this time with movers I hired who brought all my furniture from my apartment. It felt surreal to be back in these rooms that had been mine, then not mine, and now were mine again. The first thing I did was go around with my stepladder and remove all the curtain rods. I unscrewed the finials and dumped the decomposed shrimp remains into garbage bags. The smell when I opened those rods was absolutely horrific. I gagged and had to take breaks. But I cleaned out every single rod, then threw them all away. I bought new curtain rods at a home improvement store and installed them myself. Then I opened all the windows and set up fans and air purifiers. I had the carpets professionally cleaned again. I washed all the curtains and drapes. I cleaned every surface with vinegar and baking soda. Within a week, the smell was completely gone. The house smelled fresh and clean, like nothing had ever been wrong. It was almost funny how simple the solution had been this whole time. I've now been living in the house for almost 5 years. I had it redecorated to my taste, erasing all traces of Richard and Melissa. I painted the walls new colors, bought new furniture, hung different art. I made it mine in a way it had never been when Richard lived here. My career has progressed, and I'm now making good money. I was able to refinance the mortgage at a lower rate. I've paid down the principal significantly. The house is worth probably close to $500,000 now, given how the market has appreciated. I have over $300,000 in equity. I occasionally feel guilty about what I did. It was petty and vindictive and caused way more damage than I'd intended. But then I remember how Richard treated me, how he cheated and lied and threw me away and rushed me out of my own home, and the guilt fades. Richard, from what I've heard, never financially recovered. He's renting a small apartment and still paying off debts from the house situation. His relationship with his parents is strained because of the money they lost helping him. His career took a hit because he was so distracted and stressed during those months. Melissa moved to another state shortly after their breakup. I have no idea what happened to her, and I don't care. People ask me sometimes if I regret what I did, if I think it was worth it, if I feel bad about the financial damage I caused. Honestly, I don't regret it. Richard made his choices, and I made mine. He chose to cheat, to throw away our marriage, to treat me with contempt and cruelty during our divorce, to rush me out of my home with barely any notice. I chose to make sure he paid a price for those choices. Was it wrong? Probably. Was it illegal? I don't think so, though I've never asked a lawyer. Was it satisfying? Absolutely. I got my house back for a fraction of its value. I got to watch my ex-husband, who thought he could discard me like trash, face real consequences for his actions. I got justice in a way the legal system never would have given me. The divorce courts split everything according to formulas and laws, but they don't account for emotional damage or betrayal or cruelty. They don't make cheating spouses pay for the pain they cause. So I made my own justice. Some people would call me vindictive. They'd say I should have been the bigger person and moved on, that revenge doesn't solve anything, and I should have just let karma handle it. But here's the thing about karma. Sometimes it needs a little help. Sometimes the universe needs you to be the instrument of justice. Sometimes you have to stand up for yourself because no one else will. Richard thought he could cheat on me, divorce me, take almost everything, and ride off into the sunset with his mistress. He thought there would be no consequences beyond the minimal settlement the court made him give me. He was wrong. I hope he thinks of me every time he writes his rent check, living in a small apartment when he could have been in that beautiful house. I hope he remembers giving me 24 hours to pack up my life and realizes that was the biggest mistake he ever made. I hope he learned that treating people with cruelty and contempt sometimes comes back to bite you in the most unexpected ways. As for me, I'm happy, genuinely happy in a way I never was when I was married to Richard. I love my house that's truly mine now. I love my job and my life and my freedom. I went on dates for a while, though nothing serious yet. I'm in no rush. I'm enjoying being single and independent and not answering to anyone. Sometimes I walk through my house and remember that terrible Thursday night when I packed those shrimp into the curtain rods. I remember the anger and hurt and betrayal I was feeling. I remember making the decision to do something I knew was wrong, but couldn't stop myself from doing. And then I remember Richard's face at the closing when he had to sign over this house to me for practically nothing. The defeat and misery and frustration, the knowledge that he'd lost everything while I'd gotten exactly what I wanted. And I smile. People say living well is the best revenge. But I say, living well in the house your ex-husband thought he'd taken from you, that you bought back for a fraction of its value after making his life miserable with rotting seafood hidden in curtain rods, is even better. It's been 5 years now since the divorce and the great shrimp curtain rod caper, as I've come to think of it. I finally told my sister the full story last year, and she laughed until she cried. She said I was absolutely diabolical, and she was proud of me. I ran into Richard once, about 6 months ago, at a grocery store. He looked older and tired. We made awkward eye contact, and I could see him debating whether to approach me. He didn't. He just turned and went down another aisle. I wondered if he ever figured out what had caused the smell in the house, if he ever put 2 and 2 together and realized that his ex-wife, who he'd given 24 hours to move out, might have had something to do with it. I'll never know, and I don't particularly care. I'm dating someone now, actually, someone kind and honest who treats me with respect. We've been together for 8 months, and it's going really well. He knows I'm divorced, but I haven't told him the full story yet. Maybe someday I will. Maybe I'll take it to my grave. My house is my sanctuary. I've built a life here that's entirely mine. Every morning I wake up in the master bedroom, where I once found my husband cheating on me, and I feel nothing but peace. I've exorcised those demons. I've reclaimed this space. The guest bedroom, where I slept on an air mattress that last night, is now my home office. The living room, where Richard and Melissa used to sit planning their future, is where I host book club. The kitchen, where I had my farewell feast, is where I cook dinner for friends and family. I've overwritten every bad memory with good ones. Sometimes I think about the me from 5 years ago, packing up her life in 72 hours, humiliated and heartbroken and angry. I wish I could tell her that it all works out, that she gets the house back, that Richard ends up losing everything, that she ends up happy and thriving. But I think that version of me needed to know how things would turn out. She needed to be angry enough and hurt enough and reckless enough to stuff shrimp into curtain rods. Because that single act of petty revenge changed the entire trajectory of her life. If I hadn't done it, Richard and Melissa would have lived happily in my house. I would have stayed in that small apartment, struggling financially, bitter about how unfair the divorce had been. Instead, I'm here, in this beautiful home that's worth hundreds of thousands more than I paid for it, living my best life. Was it wrong? Probably. Would I do it again? In a heartbeat. Do I have any regrets? Only that I didn't use more shrimp. The universe has a funny way of balancing things out. Richard thought he'd won when he got the house in the divorce. He thought he'd gotten everything and I'd gotten nothing. But in the end, I got the house, my dignity, and a pretty good story. He got debt, a ruined relationship, and a very expensive lesson about treating people with respect. So here's to petty revenge, to standing up for yourself, and to the healing power of decomposing seafood in curtain rods. May we all have the courage to fight back when life treats us unfairly, even if our methods are unconventional. And may we all remember that when someone gives you 24 hours to leave your own home, sometimes the best response is to leave them a gift they'll never forget. The end. Did this story get to you? Leave a like and subscribe. More true stories are coming soon.